All right, everyone, good morning. We'll use some props for our practice today. So consider grabbing 2 blocks, a strap, and a blanket, and anything that may replace those items, like a dog leash, a paper towel, whatever comfortable blanket or cloth you might have. And after you gather your props, take a moment to find a comfortable seat. And you may consider a bolster or a cushion underneath the hips for your seat. Maybe it's that blanket or a block. And begin to allow yourself to settle into your seat. And as you begin to settle into your seat, allow yourself to fidget in an intentional way, beginning to cultivate a sense of intuitive comfort for the body. If it feels comfortable, perhaps close your eyes. And beginning to take the inventory that we've grown accustomed to in our practice, considering the senses of the physical body. How's your physical body showing up this morning? How have we treated it up until this point? How does it really show up? Being curious about that. And shifting the focus to the energy consciousness, noticing perhaps qualities in the breath, maybe where the breath resides, volume, duration, just observing without judging or needing to shift or change. Just bringing the awareness to the qualities of the mind, maybe being curious about the mind states that are showing up. Having an awareness of our innate wisdom, that intuitive wisdom of the observer. Taking a little deeper understanding through that intuitive observation. Just taking a moment to acknowledge our shared experience in this moment. In the collective, as we've come to practice together. Noticing perhaps even a sense of generosity for this moment right here now. As you notice the qualities through the consciousness, the different layers of consciousness, perhaps revisiting those layers, noticing how the seat has changed, allowing yourself, if ever needed, to shift in a way that's non-harming, in a way that's more auspicious for the body, or maybe more auspicious for the other layers of consciousness. Noticing those layers in a very authentic way that reveals the truth in this moment rather than stories of the past or future. And not stealing from yourself and over efforting in this moment, in the physical body or in the energy, or even in the mind states. But shifting towards cultivating an idea of abundance, not needing to take what is not freely offered. Beginning to cultivate what might grow into a sense of generosity and sharing. From that tune in, if there is an intention that arises for you, perhaps embracing that intention and taking a moment to breathe it in. If you'd like to take your hands to your heart. And with an inhale, embracing an intention. Perhaps with an exhale, sending it out. And with each breath cycle this morning, we'll have an opportunity to reconsider that, to embrace it, send it, take it in, or send it out. And keeping that sense that we've cultivated of the layers of consciousness, maybe some of those themes in our yamas, very intentionally transition onto your back, removing your props from the mat, but keeping them close by. Come to a bridge prep position with your knees bent and the feet on the floor. And take a moment to just settle in this new posture. Perhaps there's a wiggle of the thoracic spine, bringing the shoulders underneath the chest. If that feels auspicious, that might feel like it opens the heart. And take inventory of all the arches in the body. Notice all the arches in the feet. The inner arch, the outer arch of the foot, lateral arches, and even the arches of the metatarsals. Perhaps lifting the phalanges and expanding the metatarsals, and just having just the right amount of energy in perhaps a grip of the feet. Notice the arch in the low back. Notice perhaps a round in the thoracic and an arch again in the back of the neck and the cervical spine. And then bring your awareness to the breath. And as you notice all the qualities of the breath in expansion and contraction, see if you can bring your awareness to the movement in the diaphragm. It can be a little bit more elusive sensation, but whatever sensations are available to you, consider honing inward toward a center. And very subtle, very softly, allow for the pelvis to just take a small posterior tilt as you softly exhale. Not over efforting with this, just the right amount of energy. Sometimes I like to place the fingertips between the space above the pubic bone and below the belly button. Just noticing how that tilt plays out. It could be the softest little tilt. Be curious about the extent of the exhale and just the right amount of energy that you cultivate in the breath body, in the breath consciousness, tied in with that physical arching sensation. And just look for that natural, authentic sensation that allows this rhythm to be balanced with the right amount of effort, not taking what's not freely offered. Moving from a place of abundance, even in that exhale, that evacuation. And notice that there's a bit of a rebound as you press the pelvis into the floor with this posterior tilt and the pubic bone lifts up towards the belly button, and you inhale, there's kind of a natural rebound that brings us back into those arches. And after you've played and explored with that movement, let's just return and notice those arches once again. Notice that arch in the low back in particular that we were playing with. But notice how it affected perhaps our perception of these other arches as well. And then I invite you to just have a playful move in the leg. We're going to just let the left knee fall gently out to the side and then return back to the center. And it's just an easy range of motion. You could even use the hand to guide the movement, but just let it slightly come out. Notice the engagement from the adductors as you move away. Perhaps notice the change in the arch of the back as you move away. And notice how the foot arches change, the blade of the foot against the floor as the arch side of the foot, the medial part of the foot lifts off the floor. And after you go from side to side a few times, we'll return to center. And we're going to grab a block, and I'm going to change my orientation so that I hope that you can see okay here. Please let me know if you can't. But I'm going to take the softer foam block instead of the cork block. And I'm going to place the block pretty high up towards the pelvis. And as I place it there, I can feel that adductor engagement that I warmed up a little bit with the side-to-side movement. And then from there, just gently come up in the bridge. You can use the hands for a little bit of stability, pressing down into the feet, and maybe notice how the adductors are there to engage at the 4-inch level of the block. Now, if I was further up, I wouldn't necessarily feel the actual contact with the adductors at the block. And just notice what the right height is. We don't need to over effort through the back. Just a little bit of elevation is enough. You may already be feeling some heat in the glutes or the hamstrings as we engage this block and then come back to the breath. If you need to come down at any point, please do. Then let's gently all return to the floor and just take one little playful test here. We'll go to the 6-inch height and then maybe even up towards the knee joint. So we've moved away from the adductor. What does that feel like? As I press down and rise up, do I still have that adductor sensation? How has the quality changed there? The footprint may play a big role in this. If the footprint is wider than the block, we'll really feel an internal rotation. If the footprint is tighter than the block, that will really change. There will be a slight external rotation in the thighs, and the way that we engage through the glutes will change as well. So something that you can play with different densities of the block. Different qualities will arise there, and different placements up and down the thigh. You can go ahead and remove your block. And we'll come back down to the floor and just gently bring your left knee into the chest. Maybe make a little circle with the ankle as we wake up, the distal extremities, maybe stretching through the toes. Let's go to the other side. Bringing the knee into the chest, circling the ankle a little bit. And it doesn't have to come all the way to the chest, of course, we're just bringing it towards one another. Sometimes I like to come up a little bit. Sometimes I'm trying to look up at the screen. You do not have to have your head off the floor at all. I invite you to definitely rest if that's the energy that is most auspicious for you right now in this moment. And then let's grab our strap. And just for the view, I'll start with the left leg. I'm going to take the strap just below the ball of the foot, maybe slightly on the ball of the foot. And you can keep the right knee bent for a really accessible alignment through the pelvis. And then consider the spirit of a vertical reach in the left leg. So we don't have to get into a big hamstring stretch this early. That wouldn't feel really nice for me. Maybe for some people, they'll enjoy that. But what I'd like to do is use the strap to give me something to pull downward and feel this downward directional force through the ball of the foot, and then perhaps engage through the foot, through the phalanges and the metatarsals, spreading and allowing for whatever degree of bend makes sense here, and taking still a vertical reach upward through the legs. So those two forces, those two directional forces are at play here, and really just playing with that. So you might take a few bends and extends and notice how the vertical component might be a lot more beneficial than the movement this way in order to really engage some of the muscles on both sides of the joint. So perhaps you're feeling your calf as well as your tibialis. And just take a second to switch sides. So if it feels available to you, you can take this leg down and it will continue a perpendicular directional force as well as you extend through the resting leg. But begin to cultivate the vertical directional forces at play in the leg here, coming down with the strap, reaching up with the leg, and allowing for whatever degree of bend in the knee feels auspicious for you as you wake up, those engagements through isometric work. With the leg extended, you might feel a really different engagement in the arch of the low back. And with the leg extended and engaged, you'll feel still a different sensation in the torso and the low back. And then just for a moment, perhaps playing with both legs in the strap. To whatever degree feels good, with a bent knee, and perhaps even playing with a little bit of width if you would like. So those are variations to just have a little fun with and be playful with. I tend to like the little bit of reach and extension. Spreading the toes, pointing and flexing the feet as well. All right, and we'll just take a moment to release our strap down. And let's bring the left knee back into the chest and extend the leg up. And if you feel comfortable with the leg down, you can keep the leg down. Otherwise, a bent knee can be available here. Take your arms out to the sides and consider a point in the left foot, maybe even an expression through the toes spreading, and draw a small circle with the left leg. And notice how some of that movement is occurring in the hip, how some of the engagement is happening in the muscles of the quad, maybe even in the calf. Switch the directions. You can play with how tight or how broad that circle is. And then bring the knee into the chest. Allow yourself to wiggle out anything that lit up more than you wanted it to. And let's go to the other side. So the right knee into the chest before it comes up, and then extend the leg vertically, perhaps checking in with the left leg as a complement. Get all the way through those distal sensations in the toes, in the foot, perhaps pointing or spreading, and then a little bit of a circle. The hands can help to get a bigger circle if a bigger circle feels like the right amount of energy for you. But once again, not taking what is not being freely offered. Being really honest about what level of engagement is right for this movement in this posture today. And then allow for any little fidgets that help make that feel complete. And in your own time, in your own way, come to a seated position, staff pose, so you can roll over to the side, maybe help yourself up with the hands. And as you come to take a seat, let's take one block and place it between the heels. So take a moment to find an extension through the legs, maybe flexing the feet up, perhaps playing with that spread of the toes again to open up the lower extremity engagement. Maybe it would feel nice to have your hands back behind you, but not clinging to any idea of what this shape has to be. Just think the spirit of an extension horizontally on the floor and what an spirit of a vertical reach is. So expanding upward through the crown of the head as you root down through the sits bones. Now I invite you to play with floating the right leg off the floor and perhaps pressing it into the block for a moment. And keep in mind, a bent knee will be much more accommodating for this. If you haven't done this lift and hover before, then you may feel some engagement here that could even lead to cramping. So a bent knee can be a little bit more accessible there. You might also keep this at a very low height or just take it away and play with just hovering and moving. But if you're able to get into the block a little bit and press into it, especially a softer density, we can engage a little bit through some of these muscles in an isometric way, starting to turn things on without the need of a load. So once again, just being playful with the lift, the hover, just that extent of just the right amount of hover and just the right amount of pressing. And noticing where that shows up. Notice a tendency also to perhaps lift by leaning back, right? That doesn't change the angle here, but it might be necessary too. So if you can keep the spirit of extending up while you play with the hover of the foot, we're starting to warm up these load-bearing limbs and the lower extremities. You can also play with the second block. And I encourage you to play with this when you have more time on your own. And you can play with going outside the sagittal plane and rotating out, maybe even pressing in through those outer angles. You can feel how this is starting to warm up these lower, especially the quads. Maybe you're noticing some heat building up in your core temperature. Perhaps your breath has changed. Let's take a moment to transition to a tabletop pose with very specific intention. So maybe just leaning to the side and bringing our knees underneath the hips. It might feel really nice to have a blanket or a pillow underneath the knees. Or perhaps just rolling the mat. Once you arrive to your tabletop position, set the wrists beneath the shoulders and the knees beneath the hips. And allow for any little movements and fidgets that feel nice as you wake up the body this morning. Maybe connecting to the breath with a cat-cow. Sometimes it feels nice to have an exhale as you round, which is again that posterior tilt and an evacuation that draws in. Maybe you can let the head rest And just notice what the duration of breath and the energy of breath does to the movement, as well as the energy and the movement and the duration of the movement, how that affects the breath. So if this is working really well for you, I invite you to just stay there and play and fidget through your tabletop. Or if you'd like to play with a different level of height, you can play with bringing the blocks underneath the wrists. So here's a 4-inch block height, and I might feel a little different as I floss the shoulders at this slightly different height. It'll feel different if I lean forward or back as well. You get a little different variation at the 6-inch height. Sometimes it feels a little different to be able to come back with the floor 6 inches higher. Coming forward with the floor 6 inches higher. So you notice that this offers a lot more depression in the scapula. And as you change the height, you can use this to continue to cultivate that curiosity in a little bit different perspective. So now I invite you to play with a very gentle transition, hopefully not moving too fast through here, but I'll just demonstrate quickly. I'm going to keep the blocks at the 6-inch height, and I have a cork block here. If I was on one of these less dense foam blocks, it would be a lot less stable for me to push into. So consider those blocks and how they support different directional forces. But I'm going to play with coming into a plank to a down dog. So I have a nice enough block stability to reach my hips up and back. And once again, I have a different directional force in my shoulders. So I'm not trying to get into a preconceived idea of what this shape should be. But I'm going to play a little bit with how a movement between plank and down dog may play out in an undulation of the spine. So kneeling plank, or perhaps if you're feeling warm, perhaps your knees do not touch the ground, that's fine. Consider if you can press into the blocks to release the neck. Maybe you'll play a little bit with the calf extension by bending the knee and pedaling the feet. Just allowing for the little tabletop plank down dog dance to play out in the way that's most auspicious for your body as it shows up today, honestly, authentically. Now allow yourself to maybe walk these blocks back. Maybe this may be a little much on one side at a time, but take little baby steps and bring the blocks back to a forward fold. And let's take them to the 9-inch height. So as you take the blocks all the way up, perhaps bending the knees and reaching the hips back, extending through the crown of the head, and using the blocks almost to set up a standing tabletop sensation. And from that, if it feels okay to take a little bit of that cat-cow, allow for those little undulations in the spine. And as we play with the footprint and the fingerprint, look for the auspicious orientation of your grounding, perhaps taking your right hand over to the left block and playing a little bit in this side bend. And in your own time, just allowing this little dance of movement. Perhaps you're staying much longer than I am, and that would be great. Perhaps that allows you to breathe a little more into those shapes, into those postures. We'll take one more time. I'm complementing this with my hips almost trying to turn to the left as my shoulders turn to the left and not let my hips go to the right as I go to the left. So that actually does give me, and it's very subtle. So I'm just a little extension back there maybe. And then playing with a little bit of rotation here. So if I'm going to rotate to the right with my shoulders, I might bend the left knee. And I can bring my hand to the hip. And maybe playing with the other side. Again, stay for as long as it makes sense for you. You might be moving quickly. Or you might be staying for a while. Fingertips and palms will feel really different. Again, this cork block provides a lot of stability for this movement. So now let's come back to center. Take your feet about hips to shoulders distance apart, what makes sense for you. And then just allow yourself to fold whatever degree feels nice with a bent knee, maybe allowing your neck to relax, maybe grabbing opposite elbows. And after a breath or two, climb back up the block. With the knees bent, climb up to the thighs. And with the strength of the legs and the strength of the spine, push down through the floor, drawing in and rise up to standing. Shrug the shoulders up and back and down. Forward, up, back, down. And one more time. And as you settle the shoulders down, come into a Tadasana footprint that feels auspicious for you. Consider using the block for Tadasana. And again, I'm going to take the block up high to the pelvis. And that might mean...
I have this on the web for using the block for today. Check it out.
Siri, no one's talking to you. I'm taking the block all the way up to the pelvis, which means that I have to change my footprint for me. As I get a little broader in order to create space for this block, I'm still trying to find the right scaffolding for this. So the base and then the hips and then the block. Now I just want to show a little bit of the dynamic here of the pelvic tilt and the femur rotation here. So this always reminds me of a Pez candy. I'm old, yes. So as the Pez dispenser would spit out a nice square little pellet candy, right? What we're doing here to get that Pez candy is a little bit of a tuck in the tailbone and a little bit of a lift in the pubic bone. So I don't know if you can see, it's quite a subtle movement, and I'm exaggerating the movement. So I'm just inviting the spirit of what that might feel like. We can break this down at a closer camera angle as well. So just look for that middle way where it's just a little bit of rotation and tuck that actually engages with the block. And notice if that helps to root down through the feet. Notice if that helps to root down through the metatarsals and the toes. And then coming upward, does it inform through the pelvic floor and the torso? Maybe coming back to the shoulders and letting the hands rest at the sides. So if this block is working for you here, we can keep it here and play a little bit with how we can come into chair with the block. So again, hopefully the block is helping to inform how I'm rooting down, and everyone's lever lengths and the diversity of that might be different. Where would your footprint make sense with a block at what level and then where in the thighs? but perhaps coming into this position. Don't worry about coming up too high or extending into a back bend. We haven't quite warmed that up, but maybe just reach forward. And perhaps with that forward reach, you may even come back and squeeze through the shoulder blades. We might be getting a little bit warm down here. Perhaps there's an inhale as you reach. Think about breathing, perhaps expanding through the shoulder blades and then exhaling to cactus back. Maybe we can try that vertically now that we're a little more warmed up here. With a little bit of heat, reach up, inhale, exhale, cactus. And maybe one more time, inhaling. And exhaling. And then coming back to Tadasana. We can set the block aside. Go ahead and shake out the legs and notice if there is a little more energy in there. Come back to our Tadasana. I'll give you one more option for this block. You don't have to take this, but sometimes it does feel nice to have it down in the shins, and you'll get to understand what the difference is between using that engagement below the knee versus above the knee, how the femurs play out, and how it works in the rooting down of this. If you've had enough block, I totally understand. But rooting through the feet, perhaps coming into a nice gentle chair pose. Don't worry about getting too deep. We're just exploring this and finding the right amount of effort, especially if we haven't tried this before. But perhaps we get to reach the arms up. And then I'll invite a little different movement here. Perhaps the left arm can come down while the right arm is up. And if you'd like to have this be a kinetic swing, go at your own pace with that and notice how that can change as you squeeze through the block. If you're dancing, I'm not mad. Might be going really slow, like a swim. I'm just trying to connect the dots here from the tips of the fingers as you feel the friction of the air between the fingertips to the space between the toes. All right, and then let's release that block one more time, coming back to Tadasana and check in with those load-bearing limbs, noticing any shift of energy and sensation, if you'd like to shake anything out. And just take a moment to find a Tadasana that feels aligned with our opening Yama check-in. After heating up the load-bearing limbs, can we come to a compassionate Tadasana that's not harming, a very true, authentic shape? Not taking what's not freely offered. Just the right amount of energy, moderating. And still working from a place of abundance. With the capacity to perhaps share, moving more towards abundance and away from hoarding. We're going to play a little bit with balance, so I probably should have had you get to a wall sooner before that Tadasana cueing. Apologize. But we're going to play a little bit with tree pose. So if you're fine where you are, try to continue to cultivate that grounding through Tadasana. And allow yourself to find a footprint that isn't going to be much different when you switch to a unilateral stance versus a bilateral stance, or just be aware of the transition that will take place between bilateral base of support and a unilateral base of support. Think about how you align your center of gravity over the base of support. And take a moment to shift the weight over the left leg. Maybe getting light in the right heel. Noticing if you can keep the hinge in the left knee so that the leg strength is available and the pelvic floor is at an angle that helps line up the torso. And perhaps you can float the right toes off the floor and maybe take the arch to the left calf. It can really help to find a specific sight line, a drishti or a point of focus about 3 or 4 feet in front of you to cultivate concentration and focus and kind of take that inward focus and outward focus and continue to focus, or continue the reciprocity of that switch. Those little fluctuations that happen inward. If you'd like for the leg to lift to the thigh, that's an option. And you may notice that adductor muscle that we played with the blocks available there. Perhaps you can raise your arms up if you want to be playful with that. It's nice to have a wall close by. You may even play with a little bit of movement in that balance. Perhaps a little side bend. And as thoughtful as you came into the pose, see if you can just gently return to Tadasana, using the transition to Tadasana as a focus exercise as well. Return to Tadasana and notice the shift in the energy of the legs and the energy of the breath and the qualities of the mind. And how we're observing this shared moment in the collective. As we begin to think about shifting to the other leg, grounding through the right foot, maybe getting light in the left heel. Notice the hinge in the knee, the pelvic floor, the core, perhaps floating the toes off the floor and just meeting the calf. That's enough to play with balance. Is there a sight line that works for you last time? Would you like to go back to that sight line? Considering an option of staying or perhaps the foot traveling up. Noticing that engagement at the inner thigh. And just continuing to play with that sense of focus inward and outward. Proprioception and introspection. Wherever you might be playing on this side, begin to make your way home. Slowly returning to a center. Slowly returning to Tadasana. And just taking another moment in Tadasana to notice things. From Tadasana, inhale and reach the arms up. And with a gentle fold forward, hinge at the hips, slightly bend the knees. Allow yourself to hang down. And then in your own time, come down into a seat on the floor. And make sure you have 2 blocks close by. We're going to take them to either side of the mat. And we'll lay back on the back. We'll take these blocks on either side to support a knee bend in the twist. You may want to have a blanket close by as we prepare for Shavasana. We're just going to take a knee bend and allow the knees to fall over to the right. Maybe letting them land on the block, nice and comfortable. And perhaps that elevation in the block, maybe even a blanket,
might give enough grounding energy or leverage for the left shoulder to come down. Or just allowing it to come a little bit closer to the floor. What height makes sense on that block on the right side? Just take a few moments to allow for a little more peaceful, tranquil breath, perhaps a different quality of breath than the balancing or the chair. And then gently, as you're ready, using the floor for support with the feet, switch to the other side. And just notice what height makes the most sense. On this side, it might be very different from the other side. I have it at the 6-inch height, which really keeps my legs up a lot higher and allows me to perhaps bring my torso in this direction and allowing my right hip to join this directional orientation with the lower leg, with the load bearing limbs. Hollowing out up in the thoracic, below the ribs. Returning to that gentle breath.
And then your own time, coming back to center and gently returning to your back. And grabbing any props that will help find a nice gentle shavasana. Perhaps rolling a blanket underneath your knees, blocks underneath the knees, or maybe covering yourself in the blanket. And just allow yourself to take this time in the next however many seconds, as much time as you need to settle. Beginning to release and let go. And beginning to find a sense of ease. Beginning to find a sense of tranquility. I invite you to let the breath become gentle and soft. I invite you to shift your awareness to that inner wisdom. And trust that that inner wisdom will guide you to that relaxation and tranquility. That sense of ease. Perhaps the eyes are closed. Still observing, still viewing the stillness, the ears, not neglecting the honest sounds that are there, but perhaps noticing the space between sounds, the silence between sounds. Sensing the air against the skin, or the floor, or the clothes against the skin. And noticing the senses in the nose, the taste in the mouth. And with all those senses, embracing a sense of ease. As we begin to welcome a sense of peace into all the layers of consciousness. In this morning practice, as the sun begins to rise, maybe more for some of us than others. Consider a sense of liquid sunlight pouring into your body, filling you with a warmth, comfort, and an easy vitality, a gentle vitality. A light that reveals your truth. A light that radiates in abundance. A light with just the right amount of energy, not too bright, not too dim. And a light that fills you with a willingness to share this illumination. Begin to connect to the senses of the outer world around you. Sense of the air, floor, noticing sounds. You take a very conscious inhale and exhale. Allow your toes to wiggle and your fingers to fidget. Perhaps turning at the ankles or wrists. Begin to slowly find auspicious movements in the body, perhaps extending and stretching long. And take whatever time you need to in the next 30 seconds to find a comfortable seat. And as you allow yourself to settle into your seat, consider a position for your eyes, perhaps closing the eyes. Consider a position for your hands, maybe bringing the hands to heart center. Perhaps reflecting back on the intention that you set at the beginning of class. Or maybe a new intention arose for you. Take a moment to breathe that intention in with an inhale. And as you exhale, sending that intention outward, sharing it, sharing that illumination. Thank you so much for sharing your practice with me today. Perhaps we can make our way to a comfortable seat, or maybe we're taking a break.